Hello and welcome everyone to The Wire. And this month, it's all about the board. Wave to me if you're a board member. Give me a big fat wave. Oh, hello board members. Thank you very much for your involvement here. And to any board members who've decided to watch the recording, because this will be great professional development for you, all about the service excellence accreditation process and how you're going to connect with that. Now, give me an idea, anyone here today. You can type to me in chat or you can unmute yourself, of course, and talk to me, which I love, to hear voices, talk to each other. How have you been going engaging the board? If you're a board member, how have you been going engaging yourself and all the other board members? What's sort of been the key to that? Because it can be difficult engaging anyone in accreditation at times. Yes? Yes? What's been working? Come on, share some tips. What's been working to engage the board in the accreditation process to date? And Laura, if you had some great success with the board at Bernardo's, why don't you tell us about that? Lisa, if you've seen some amazing boards and their engagement in the process, tell me what you found to be exceptional. Let's go, let's talk.
So I did lead with, this is my second week in this position, so I'm very new. So I haven't had the opportunity to engage the board yet.
Well, your board were very engaged, I can tell you. So yeah, from my perspective, sitting on the other side of it, it's all about that preparation work and keeping in touch with the board. We offer a session to the board themselves, an hour information session, and that's generally pretty well attended, as well as an hour session for staff, just so they understand what's coming for an assessment and allay any of the fears that they might have. But I think Bernardo's, Youth Off the Streets, and most recently Veritas House did a very good job of engaging their board with just regular communication, whether that's via email or by their board portal, or their compliance lead showing up at board meetings once every couple of months to go, hi, remember this is on the agenda. So yeah.
Excellent. What else has been working? Or what's been challenging? If you're finding it challenging, it's okay to say. Hey, Kate.
I was going to say one of the resources that I've found really helpful has been the reflective questions that are up on the SHS portal. So there's a set of reflective questions for every group of people that are involved in the assessment, and I've kind of found that a really good starting point to talk to people. So rather than kind of diving right into, here's the sort of questions you're going to get asked and, this is what's going to happen in the audit, they're much kind of higher level, a real kind of, this is the stuff you need to think about, like not just for the audit, but, in running this organisation and your role in running this organisation. So I found those a really good starting point.
That's exceptional. I'm glad to hear that those resources have been put together by the industry partnership on the SHS, ACES, you're calling it there, aren't you? ACES portal are helpful because there's tons of them. It's really good to take a little wander through all those resources. Even if you've had accreditation or accreditation's not coming up for a while, they're really good quality resources just in the general scheme of things, I'm hearing Kay say there. So yeah, that's a fabulous portal for lots and lots of helpful resources. I've got some for you today as well. So thank you for that. Any other comments about how effective it's been engaging the board so far?
Lisa, yeah.
Let's go, Jill.
Lisa, I guess because we're a very small organisation and we've only got 6 people on the board, the management committee has become very engaged. We have it as a standard agenda item.
Oh, I love that.
And we also have got on our management committee also accreditation. And I think having someone with a background has also helped.
Excellent.
Wonderful. Yeah, these are the sorts of things that we have also found to be most effective when it comes to the point in accreditation when we're sitting with the board. So, you know, these are the sorts of things that they tell us have been helpful in them preparing for the process, because it's one of the introductory questions that we might ask them, you know, like, how have you been engaged in the accreditation learning about service excellence so far? And they generally will tell us, you know, that they've been well supported either by the quality lead or by the you know, the CEO, the manager, those sorts of people in the organisation. So that's always good to hear. But it can be challenging getting people on board. If you are, wave to me if you are a person with a title that's like quality lead, you know, like if you're the person who's looking after accreditation, because in larger organisations, this can sometimes be dedicated, you know, to a person who looks after it. And then the danger of that is that everyone else thinks it's that person. They're the one who does it. And so engagement, you know, across the organisation can be quite challenging, because they say, oh, that's your role. You're getting paid for that. Why do I need to be involved? And the answer to that question is that it's very important for everybody to be involved, because everybody has a piece of the organisation that they look after. You know, everybody has a role, therefore they have a piece of the organisation that they're involved in making sure goes really well. So they have a story to tell. That's the first reason why it's important that everyone's engaged. It's important that everybody's engaged because those people are going to be interviewed as part of the assessment process. And so we want them to feel confident to participate. You know, we want them to feel like they know what they might be asked, and they know they've prepared a little bit about the way that they'd like to tell their story about, you know, the systems and processes that are working to get great outcomes. So, you know, you'll see the board will be involved in many ways that you might not have even thought of. And then we're sort of talking from our perspective here, but we welcome you, of course, to talk from your perspective as well. So thanks for getting us started like that. What I'd like to take you through today is some of the gaps that we find when it comes to the board's involvement or their responsibilities through some of those indicators in the standards. I'd like to talk to you about the process and exactly where they should, you know, or could have an opportunity to engage. I'd like to talk to you about questions that they'll be asked. So if you're one preparing the board and helping them feel confident with the process, they'll want to know what they might be asked. And so we've got a list of those for you. And I've got lots of tools and resources that address some of those areas of concern that we sometimes find. All right, so I'll be relying on Lisa here to give us her insights too into some of the areas that we sometimes find are, you know, a bit light on, or, you know, at the developmental stage, or just might not have been thought about at all. So let's have a look first. I want to just, as I start to talk to you about some of the, you know, the gaps or risk areas that we see when it comes to the board and the standards, I've got some pictures to show you that I found, and I want you to pop into the chat or unmute yourself and talk to me if you can see any obvious issues when you have a look at these photos with the board. Just anything. Let's have a look. What do you observe here? Hang on, let me just get past that. Type to me in chat here if you observe anything about this board that makes you think, let's have some fun. We don't have to be serious about this. In fact, I think the people who are watching the recording, they can't see all the stuff in chat anyway. Nice, Nikki. Look at that, very respectful. Older, very good. Not representative of young people, lacking diversity, doesn't seem to be culturally diverse. All right? Those are the sorts of things that we might observe as well. And can you see that those terms, diversity, you know, gender balance, you know, those things like, you know, the age and the representation of the board would be something that we would note as assessors. I'm just going to say, you know, anecdotally, this is a picture, perfect picture of the kind of board that I might see across the community sector. I've done lots and lots of work, as Sean has, in the community centres and neighbourhood houses sector. And I often find an ageing board, an older board, all right, committed as, passionate as, skilled as, but not necessarily reflective of the diversity in their community. What about this next one? What a lovely photo that is. This is actually a board from New Zealand that I found a picture of. Anything here? It's Lizzie saying they look too happy. They've obviously just finished accreditation, do you think, Lizzie? Anything here that you notice? Now, we might have here a whole realm of diversity of background and experience here, which is fantastic. But we also think, we know a bit about, what makes organisations tick, and we think that visible diversity is important, in building things like psychological safety and, ensuring that people, feel like they're represented. What they observe is often connected to sort of how they feel about whether the organisation represents them. Yeah, very similar, isn't it? A lot of sameness there. What about this one here? I tell you, I found so many pictures like this. When I simply Googled board of directors, do you know how many I found that had one woman? How many pictures, like just stock images of board of directors, how many had one woman? Just one. And it made me think, it made me wonder, is that the sort of thing that organisations might do to bring in, a bit of diversity? It's just, I've got to have a woman. I don't know. I know that women are overrepresented a lot across the community services sector, but are they well represented at the top levels of organisations, like at the executive level and at the board level? I don't know. Something to ask yourself as a board member. Do you have the diversity on your board that's representative of your community? What about this? I think there's one more. What do you think about this one? Oh, I don't know. I think that this is the one that I might look at and go, this looks pretty good. This looks pretty good. What are your thoughts on this one? It's big. Yeah, it is a big one. Not all services have large boards. Just depends on, how they go about representation, skills, how they go about getting a quorum. Easily getting a quorum can be a bit challenging for some boards. It does appear quite corporate-y, doesn't it? It could be the table, but it is a good mix of age and culture. Yeah. So I guess I'm just talking with you about what we might observe, when we get to meet the board. And diversity on the board and representation of the community that you serve is important. It'll appear in most sort of good governance frameworks and those sorts of things, self-assessments, how you evaluate yourself. It'll pop up there, that aspect of diversity. So it's something worth thinking about. The next thing I want to share with you, thanks so much for your contributions there too. Just what we get good at as assessors is making observations. And then we look to, use questioning and review of documents to back up our observations, because on their own, observations can be sometimes more like judgments, but our observations, we're quite practiced at making observations about things like, what we see, visible diversity, things like that. The next thing I want to share with you is a document that we've put together to help boards. It's a governance self-assessment against all the requirements of the framework, because a lot of you might be thinking, oh yeah, there's a governance standard in there. That's the one the board needs to focus on. No, there's a whole heap of board responsibilities, governance responsibilities across the whole framework. So what we've done is picked out the ones that the board should have a good line of sight to. And as is my way, I've highlighted the ones in red to be the ones to really keep an eye on, because that's where we probably see most of the pips and fips. Would you know what I mean when I say that? Mostly see pips and fips. Come on, first one in the chat to type it in. What's a pip? What's a fip? What's a nip? Oh, yeah, sometimes we see nips and pips when it comes to, that's right, Kay. Sometimes we see partly in place. and that would indicate a gap, and a nib is a not in place. Look at K, fastest finger there. And so that would indicate that there's a gap. So I've put in red where we see most of the gaps. Lisa can confirm or deny here. So let me just share this with you. I'm going to pop this tool, when I'm finished looking at this tool with you, I'm going to pop it in the chat, and I've also put in the free resources that we will share with you. Actually, why don't I just put it in the chat now? Oh no, can I? Maybe. And then you'll have it to look at with me. Just give me a second to get where I need to be. Oh, just lost it. Here it comes. When you see that pop in there, you can click on that and open it up, and we'll be able to look at that together. So you can use this to facilitate a self-assessment with the board, or you could give it to the board and get them to have a conversation around the sorts of things that they'd be expected to know, that they had, and know where to find those sorts of documents, and those will be the themes for the questions as well that they might be asked. So a pretty handy little tool, I think. Where you gone? Where's it gone? I hope you've got it, because I'm having difficulty finding it again now. Here we go. Oh, got there in the end. Alrighty, here we go. So if you've taken a dive into the workbooks or into the quality portal, wherever it is that you're doing your self-assessment, none of this will be a surprise to you. But if you're not a board member and you're going to introduce this to your board, it might be a surprise to them, because they might think, oh, the governance standard, that's the one that relates to us. But look, it's much broader than that. So generally, where I haven't highlighted anything in red, we usually find that boards do a fabulous job of meeting that requirement. But look at the first one there that's highlighted. This is environmental scanning. In the new version of the standards, that term has been replaced with the word review. So review is undertaken to identify threats, explore opportunities for innovation and potential alliances. Now, people here would probably know about a SWOT analysis, or something similar. But what it is the board having a think about the environment in which they're operating and the external environment and the sorts of things in that environment that are presenting a risk and an opportunity, so that can be included in the planning. So we need to see some sort of process that prepares the board for developing a plan, whether it be a strategic plan, or whether it be a business plan, or whether it be a project plan, or a risk plan. All right, so it should take, that sort of planning should take account of what's going on. Yeah, it should have that kind of context of the broader environment. So that's something we often see boards miss, that sort of opportunity. Obviously, documents like a strategic plan, obviously documents like an operational plan or a business plan, and that's reviewed regularly. That's the sort of thing we're really looking for there, is that the plan is developed, but that there's a process to review that periodically to see how we're tracking. Okay, so that's a board's role, isn't it, to keep an eye on the strategic progress. We usually find that things like governance policies and procedures and governance manuals and responsibilities of the board are well documented. You know, we generally find that that's excellent. The governing body should have a mix of skills to fulfil its role. I think that's where I sometimes think about not just a mix of skills, but, you know, experience and representation of the community as well. That's sometimes where I think about that, but I also think about it in the diversity standard as well. One area, this is in red here, because one area that's sometimes a little underdefined is the list of legislation that the organisation must be compliant with, all the must-dos. Okay, now I know that you're going to have policies and procedures that guide compliant work practice, but we will ask the board this very specific question. We will say, how is it that you know that all of the laws that you have to be compliant with are followed 100% of the time? And you'd be surprised how many boards get thrown by that. Like, how do you know what you have to be compliant with, and how do you know that you're 100% compliant? So sometimes there's a line of sight to those requirements and how the organisation is maintaining its compliance. Sometimes it's that line of sight's not clear for the board. And sometimes it might be delegated a little bit too, you know, far away from where the real accountability is for legislative compliance, and that's with the board. Questions can come at any time. I want to highlight this one here. Monitoring and evaluation of the governing body is undertaken. And Lisa, love it if you could contribute something here, because we find many different approaches to this. But this is a process of the board having a look at itself and saying, how well are we doing?
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be super formal, but I did have one board, and they were pretty large, who said, yeah, we talk about how we're doing at meetings. Yeah, we're pretty good. So again, if we're talking about a standard, is that we would want something that's measurable. So whether you do that internally and it's, you know, I've seen it done internally and it's anonymous, or I've seen it by an external consultant that comes in at the strategic planning session or whatever, and then does a facilitation of their self-assessment of how they are each performing and what their gaps are as well, but not just, yeah, we go out to dinner and have a chat and we all think we give ourselves a pat on the back. That's not good enough.
It's not going to meet the requirements here. So I want to ask the room here, if you're on a board and you want to measure how well you're doing as a board, what might be some of the criteria that you would evaluate? Let's talk or type. What are some of the criteria you think a good board would sort of assess itself against? What would you think would be indicators of really great performance by a board? Let's go. I reckon this room could come up with a fabulous list. I'll read it out from the chat for the people who are watching the recording. Excellent. So numbers of people. So how often we have a quorum, or maybe a little score for the level of participation and engagement in the meeting. So it could be an evaluation that's done at the end of every meeting, and the group gives themselves a score about the level of participation. And that can create a baseline for improvement. Great. What else? Thanks, Lizzie. Look at that, Kay. Look at that. Get out of my resource list. I've got that one for you. That's a really good one. It's a great checklist. Using a formal checklist that's been validated by, you know, the ACNC. So that's a really good one to use. The qualifications, the skills and diversity of members. That's a really great criteria to evaluate the board against. What else? Policy review processes, regular and in good time. Right, are we keeping up to date with the sorts of things that would be processes that are helping us to reduce our risks, such as reviewing our policies and procedures? Yeah, that's a great one. What about our compliance requirements with the funding body? What about meeting all of those sorts of timeframes and, you know, attending regular meetings with funding bodies, which would be, you know, part of a good strategy for a board as well. So there'd be all sorts of things. What about to do with the staff? What sort of criteria might the board use to evaluate its performance when it comes to looking after the team? Our regular reviews of risks, risk register, etc., very, very good. Could we tick that one? The staff survey results, it's excellent. I think the board can own the staff survey results in terms of its own performance, because that indicates what? Fabulous organisational culture that they are leading, right? So I think that that's something that they should use as part of their review as well. Communications, yeah, site visits, some of the numbers of times that their organisation might have been represented in the media by a board member. Hey, there we go, look at that. There's a great list of things there. External surveys, community surveys, so stakeholder surveys that say that the organisation's doing a great job of leading or a great job of engaging, collaborating in the rest of the sector, right? All those things there can be indicators of success and can be used to evaluate the performance of the board from year to year. So we love to see things like that that have been developed. But what I've got for you is a couple of really good examples that you can use as a governance performance evaluation framework. So we do like that you might link your performance evaluation to a validated framework. And what I mean by that is one that's for the community sector, you know, not one that's been borrowed from BHP and tried to be forced into that sort of community sector box, which happens. It just brings people undone, yeah. Yeah, so what I'd like to say out of that too is that sometimes boards do a good job of this performance appraisal bit, right? They do the survey and they get all the surveys in, it's really good, it gets put in a folder in a filing cabinet and it doesn't get turned into an action plan. Right, so we might see that you've evaluated your performance and then we'll see that's been done for the year. And we go, hang on, but where's the plan for actioning those improvements? So that's what we sometimes find there is missing. So if you've done some sort of board performance appraisal, let's make sure that gets turned into a plan that can be actioned over time, you know? Yeah. Well, that's great. That's great. I'll go back to this little document here. I hope that this is something that you might find useful. Just going down here, another one is delegations are documented. That's very important, isn't it? If the board are going to delegate any responsibilities out to the CEO or any other staff member, that they be clear. We generally find that financial delegations are quite clear, but there are other types of delegations in an organisation, aren't there? Such as, you know, employing staff and firing staff and and applying for funding and signing off on policies and procedures and things like that. So making sure that all the delegations are clear. There's another red bit there about legal responsibilities that I've spoken about. The board do own the sort of risk management system, the risk management framework. And so, you know, that they really need to determine a framework that helps them to manage risk, to keep the organisation safe on lots and lots of levels. So we sometimes find that there is a risk management policy in place, but that it might not be supported with a detailed plan about how all those risks are going to be mitigated. We sometimes find that there are obvious risks that are missing off the plan. Recently, Lisa and I have done lots and lots of assessments, and there's been a few that haven't referenced that word that we shall not talk about at all. And we find that a little strange, in that we find that is evidence that it might not have been reviewed in the last sort of 18 months.
Or they only talk about that. No, I'm serious. I've seen it where they go, no, this is our risk plan. We'll get it. But then we, you know, over the last 2 years, we've seen fires, pandemic, tsunami in some areas last week, flooding. Yeah. So it's not just thou that shall not be named.
Yes. So making sure that your risk identification covers off on all the things that could impact on you achieving your objectives, right? So that requires regular review. both to make sure that everything that's affecting you in the external environment, the internal environment is there, but that it's regularly reviewed to make sure that those controls or those mitigating strategies are in place and effective. Right? Sometimes risk plans are things that are done for accreditation, or they're done for the funder, as in the ones that might have been done recently around the pandemic. And then that's kind of it. But, you know, risk management is a process that's ongoing. It's embedded in lots and lots of the work that you do. So having a good framework around that is really important. And that's something, you know, that the board need to be able to talk to us about.
I had a question.
Let's
okay.
go, Lizzie.
So I understand the accountability for risk management framework with the board, but if the registers and things like that aren't fully connected, what's your acceptance standard with that? So we may have information in sort of ad hoc level. Yeah.
Well, we have really high tolerance for that, and this is how Lisa and I and other assessors on the team will make a decision about whether something is going to be a gap or whether we're going to write it up for you as an improvement opportunity. And our decision making there, I won't talk for Lisa, but my decision making there is about whether or not there's a risk to your organisation. So small organisations that don't have a fully developed risk framework with all those 4 documents there that we just looked at, but they have this and they have that and they do this and they talk about it, that's going to be sufficient for them in the context of them. But if you're a really big organisation looking after programs that are high risk, if you have a big strategic goal or you're going through a big restructure or you've got some issues with your funding and you don't have a good risk plan and risk framework in place, we might suggest that there's a gap there because it's not sufficiently robust to support you and your organisational objectives. So that's how we do it. We go, well, you know, they don't have this and that. Is that a risk to them? Yeah, that's a big risk to them because look at what they're involved in here, you know, So that's how we look at it. And if we can see that things are in the developmental phase, you know, we'll put that in there and we'll say continue with plans to do this. Yeah. So it would either appear as a gap if it presented a high risk that you didn't have that document or you hadn't identified that risk, or it would appear as an improvement opportunity.
Yeah, and just on that as well, I mean, as long as everything is covered in some way, we've had people that call documents by some different names and that we would think, that doesn't really fit with the standard, but you know what, they're not our documents. So we may offer some opportunities for improvement in order to systemize things a little bit better so there's not duplication, or in the case of an assessment, triple, you know, so it's just about having another set of eyes to think, say, hey, have you considered doing this in order to cover the risk, but also to make it easier for you so that you're not having to, you know, move things around, and you might miss it if you've got an incident report and you're having to manually put them on an incident register and then another register. So, you know, just looking at the ways that you can work a bit easier too.
Perfect. We also would direct you, that's a great question to use it as an example, Lizzie, because if you go back to have a look at the workbook, the intent of the standard will be at the top. So where it says risk management standard, the intent of the standard will be there. And that's really what we're trying to achieve. We're trying to achieve the intent of that standard, which is to provide, you know, protection to the organisation. All right, so it'll happen in lots of different ways and we will, you know, communicate that together. If we do find gaps while we're on site, by the way, we do talk that through. It won't just appear in the report. We do try to talk with you about what else you might be able to show us if we're finding that there is a gap. Yeah, so it's done collaboratively there. Compliance with financial requirements of the funding bodies. Now, I wouldn't want to suggest ever that there's an organisation that we've met that has not been able to submit the reports that funding bodies require. The thing that we often find that's challenging is that they don't have a system or a tool that helps them to see the things that are due and when they're due, and, you know, like things like important targets or KPIs or important acquittal dates, or, you know, project measurements that they need to collect as they go. It's too late to sort of work that out at the end of the project period. So it's generally a tool that gives a visual on compliance with funding body requirements that's sometimes lacking. All right, so it means it's sort of clunky for people to be able to do that efficiently and effectively. So that's the sort of system gap that we see, not that reports are not presented. And we often find this is a bit underdeveloped in some organisations, and this is one where it's very contextual. So a large organisation that's, you know, that has a large budget, that might have a large discretionary budget even, how nice would that be, should be helping the board to make decisions through what we might call a business case. You know, and the business case talks about the risks and the benefits and the impact, and why it's a good idea to spend this money, or why it's a good idea to invest in this project or take on this program. So anything that we're sort of purchasing or anything that we're taking on should be supported by a bit of a business case that has a look at the impact on the organisation. All right, and that's where the gaps generally are for us as assessors when it comes to the governance responsibilities. Thanks, Heidi. Take care.
Marie, can I just ask one question? Sorry to go back to it, but the legislative compliance, is it sufficient to have the legislation that's relevant to a particular policy and procedure referenced in the policy, or would it be necessary to have an actual list of every single legislative act that we need to be aware of?
Well, that depends again on the size of your organisation and how easy it is for the board to be able to see its legislative compliance requirements and responsibilities. So, yes, it's great when legislation is referenced in policies and procedures. But if the board were, if I was to ask that question to the board, such as how do you know you're 100% compliance with all the legislation, which is something a board should know for sure, yeah. What would they say? They wouldn't say, oh, we know because we've got our legislation listed in our policies and procedures. They'd want to see something like maybe a compliance list or compliance register that said these are all our must-dos. Like these are our really, really high-level must-dos that everybody's got to keep an eye on. So there should be sort of something like that for the board. It could be a list of, you know, the top 10 sort of pieces of legislation that are most impacting on the organisation in a governance manual or in a board induction list or something like that. Some organisations do have a compliance register, and it says this is the legislation, this is the link, this is the hyperlink to the actual piece of legislation, this is how we get updates, because updates to legislation would be pretty important, wouldn't they? Because they'll have an impact on the organisation. Yeah, so and then it might have another tab for compliance with funding body requirements, yeah, which is like a more of like a regulatory kind of requirement. So we just want we want the board to feel confident that compliance is a focus and it's getting done. Yeah. But that's a very great thing to have legislative references in your policy and procedure manual. Excellent. Excellent. Any other questions about that sort of checklist? Is that going to be helpful? So use that tool with your board or give it to the board and get them to go through it over a number of meetings. So I facilitated that with boards online even, you know, where I'm coaching boards to lead the process. We go through that and it's good learning. Next, the process and where the board will intersect with the process here. And it will happen from the beginning. And the beginning of the process is the preparation and the planning, isn't it? Put this. Got the wrong view there. I'll fix that up for you. Here it is. Oh. So the board's opportunity to get involved early at the planning and preparation stage is to to attend our information session, right? So if you have an opportunity, even if you want us to do another one, we do it online for you. If you want the board to, before the accreditation comes up, have an information session where they get to ask lots of questions about the process, that would be great. We also would love it if the board could be involved in deciding sort of when they would like to be interviewed. Because they're a pretty important sort of cohort of interviewees, we would really love it when we're doing the schedule if we make sure that we prioritise getting the timing for them right. All right, so they will be involved in saying, well, that's when we, that's when it's going to work for us to come together as a board and to be interviewed. We like to have at least 3 board members as part of that interview, but we love it when everybody's there. So it just depends on, who's available, but if we have 3, that's a good sample size. So they'll have to be available and they'll have to be, informed about the process and what's going to be required of them. That interview is about an hour long. It can sometimes go to an hour and a half, but we find we can ask the questions that we need to in that hour. I'll show you the questions shortly. They won't be involved in the opening meeting unless they want to be. They will be involved in the auditing process through the interview. They might want to show us certain documents as part of that interview. That's fine as well. But what we love to hear is things about system improvements. We love to hear about, ways that they are working with their community. I mean, they're there to serve the community, that they're constitutionally set up to sort of serve in terms of their purpose. So we love to hear stories about how their leadership is affecting that, the better outcomes in their community. We love to hear things about the learning that they've been doing as a board, that sort of continuous improvement is embedded. So those kinds of stories are really great. In the closing meeting, they will always be invited to attend the closing meeting, and that generally takes the form of a presentation of the findings. So those of you who've been through your accreditation, such as Laura at Bernardo's, you might have been part of Lisa giving feedback to the organisation. So we always invite the board to be part of that because it's quite positive, it's quite motivating, and it's good for everyone to be on the same page with any improvement focus, over the next 3 years. So if the board are there, it shows great leadership. They will be involved, if there are gaps, they will be involved in following up any of those corrective actions, those things that we put in the report that we think you need to show some further evidence of or strengthen in order to get accredited. So they could be involved in following up and making some of those improvements themselves as they relate to the governance requirements. So, given that we really do see them as the leaders in the organisation, it's important that we see that they are involved. I have done assessments where it's been very hard to get board members along to the interviews. That's not common, but it does sometimes happen. And it raises a whole heap of questions for me about the governance and leadership of the organisation if board members couldn't come along to a process like this, which is important. It's connected to funding, the regulatory side of things. So just want the board to feel confident and feel great about coming and telling the leadership story for the organisation. That won't be a problem for anyone, will it? No, they're busy people. So we often find that we need to hold this interview after hours, and that's okie dokie with us. That's not a problem at all. 6 p.m. board interviews, very common for us. So let's get them engaged any way we can, make it easy for them. So what will they be asked? Oh, well, we're going to give you all the questions that we will be asking, and I'll pop that in the chat for you now here so you can have a look. And this is a resource that will be available for you after the session, so you can take it and give it to the board. There it is. Click on that, have a little look. There won't be any surprises in there because these are questions that relate directly to all the indicators that we just spoke of in the self-assessment checklist we just looked at and the workbook that you will have definitely been through. But we find that boards really want to know what they're going to be asked. And, you know, the learning style of some people is they want to prepare, they want to get their script ready, they want to get their stories ready. And once we start chatting, you know, once they start talking to us, they forget all about their script. You know, forget all about those questions there. And it'd be rare, wouldn't it, Lisa, for us to ask all of them?
Oh gosh, yes. No, it's a conversation. It's not it's not a quiz. So I always tell people it's not a quiz. It's a, you know, it's like one of those you know, those wool balls, is that you get a little piece of it and then you just start pulling, so it goes somewhere else. Kay's laughing. Yes.
Oh, I like that one. That analogy. Is that an analogy?
I have a cat, right?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Crazy cat lady. Good. Good. Right. So you've got that there to share with them. The last little thing that I'd like to go through with you are some resources that we've pulled together. And recently I've had some lovely opportunities to work with boards on their performance evaluation side of things. And you know what? We have found some really lovely community sector frameworks, performance frameworks and governance standards that you could use. Now, it sounds like Kay has been using the ACNC governance standards and checklist. That's great. That's just one of them. Let me have I'll click in. I'll show you where I've got them. So you'll get a copy of the PowerPoint presentation with this set of resources. And so I've popped the links into the end of it for you. Oh, there's just some questions that they might be asked, but I've given you the list there. Here we go. So 4 capability frameworks that I found. So the ACNC governance standards. So this might not be something that you've hooked into, but you might be using other ACNC resources, such as, you know, checklists, compliance checklists and things like that. But there are some governance standards there, and they've also got a self-evaluation checklist that you can use with the board. So if you wanted to, you know, get nicely aligned with all the ACNC standards and requirements, that would be a good one to use. There's one from Victoria. I can't remember now what DFFH stands for. Oh, something. They've changed it from DHHS, but there is a governance for community organisations toolkit. So you can use that facilitator's toolkit to do a self-assessment with the board. I really like that one because it's got case studies about different ways that you could use that framework in it, and the case studies are really varied, so I'm sure you'll be able to find your own organisation in there. So that I like that one. The AICD company directors, not-for-profit resources. Let's have a little look at that one actually, because that's one I found recently that I used with an organisation, and they've now aligned all of their governance performance to these not-for-profit governance principles. And I've put these into the resources for you. Let's have a look at the snapshot of the principles. Is that something that you're seeing there, Lisa? Can you just tell me that you're seeing the principles on the screen?
We've got the capability frameworks and tools page with the hyperlinks.
I'll do it. I'll do it again. Sometimes happens to me. Here we go. Right, so this is the AICD not-for-profit governance principles, and the principles inform a whole heap of supporting practices. And this also comes with a self-assessment or, you know, governance evaluation checklist, or, you know, a tool that you can use for an annual survey. So they've got, you know, these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 9, 10 principles. And then the practices on the right-hand side would be things that the board could use to evaluate themselves against. So again, this is just a framework, but you know what a framework can do is sort of set you up well for developing a baseline from year to year, so you can see your improvement, and you can see, the board can see where they might want to strengthen some aspect of their governance practice. Right, and this is what I mean by a validated tool, is that it is specifically for use with the community sector or not-for-profit sector. You know, it's not just been sort of rebranded from the corporate sector. It actually has at its heart a lot of that sort of community development connection, which I like. All right, so that's a really good one that I found. And the last one, is an Indigenous one that's connected with the Indigenous Governance Awards. It's the Indigenous Governance Toolkit, which, you know, is beautiful, beautiful. It's got lovely language. I think, you know, anybody could use that. That is, you know, providing services predominantly to, you know, the Aboriginal community or to, you know, First Nations people's families. That could be something that you might want to align your governance practice focus towards, is the, you know, the outcomes for the Aboriginal community. So there you go. If you're kind of struggling with that aspect of the governance performance evaluation, this might be a way to put some nice sort of structure around it. Something to trial anyway. Now that's what I was hoping we would chat about today. Is that, did I kind of nail it for you? Have you gotten something out of this you think you could take to the board, or you can just share this recording with them? Maybe you're thinking, well, let's have a session for the board and, you know, get them to have a look at some of these resources first, and then they might have some questions that we could answer for them.
Highly recommend that the board engage in that. Highly.
What do you think the feelings of the board are? What sort of words would you use? Let's just finish off with some voices from different people. What do you think the feelings of the board are at the moment from your perspective? Jill was saying before that her board are very engaged, and I know that to be true because I've been down there in the room learning with them. You know, it's been fantastic. But what are you experiencing?
Because our boards are volunteers, I think they find the process quite onerous. And so we're having a bit of resistance because it's a time impost in them. They already dedicate some time to us for running, you know, being on the board, for governing their organisation, for fundraising for their organisation. So then to put the onus on them to evidence that they are governing effectively, I think they're finding challenging. But I think it's all there. I think they've got everything. They just need to think about how they demonstrate it.
Well, that's some of the messaging there that we would always use with boards, not because we're trying to spin any of this, but because we believe it, is that this is a great opportunity for them to talk about their leadership story, you know, to talk about how their governance is having an impact on outcomes in that community. And it's just, you know, generally it's so positive and so inspiring. And that's really what we're looking for when they're answering those questions, is that they, you know, that they tell us, look, we've sort of put this in place, but we also do this. And a lot of the story is not going to be in a document. A lot of the story is going to be about their ethos and, you know, why they're on the board, and things like that are really interesting to us as well. So most boards report back to us that they found it an enjoyable experience to be able to just talk about that, you know. Yeah. So yes, there's work, but you know, that checklist, like that is the list. It's not like that list plus. That list, you'll see it's the same as the list of questions. You'll see it's the same as the stuff that you'll pull out of the workbook and the self-assessment. So I think you could say, look, this is sort of finite. If you can tell me that you know where this stuff is or that we have this stuff, that's all we need to sort of do, you know, then come along, be willing to talk about your experience on the board.
Liska, have you had a session with the board, like with Highwire and the board? I'm not sure who
We
you're
have, but we're super complicated because we have a governing body for the WCS, but we have 9 shelters that sit underneath. So we've got 9 other boards.
It's 9 boards. Oh my
Yeah,
God.
so I think Mari will be coming, or Lisa will be picking a few of them to come out and see. So
yeah, I just found like that board session that Marie conducted with my board, like just kind of loosened things up a bit, you know.
yeah, I wonder if we do need to do, could we do one with people from, because so what Taz and I are doing is we have a representative from each of the 9 board, well it's actually 8 at the moment, who come and meet once a month to talk about accreditation. And we're going through the standards and we're like, oh, can you think of a good, like you're doing here, but for our but yeah, how would you feel about coming along to one of those? Would that be?
No, that'd be fantastic.
Okay, yay.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what we're talking about. So give me some dates of future
Oh my God, that would
ones.
be awesome.
Yes. Yeah, so I'm reconnecting with lots and lots of our Sydney clients again now. So I'll be on the ground a bit more down there, so that can be possible. But otherwise, just zoom me into one of your next ones.
Yeah, well, we do it, because the shelters are all over New South Wales, so we do a Zoom, so that would be fantastic. That would be amazing.
Anytime at all, really. I mean it, because this is part of the success for us as assessors, but for you as organisations with accreditation. So yeah, that's good.
Oh my gosh, that would be amazing. I feel so much happier.
Yeah, no, that's going to be really important as I'm hearing it now.
That's made the whole hour worthwhile for you, hasn't it, Liska?
Yes. Well, you know, yeah, it's the work we do now in the lead up to our visit that makes it all successful. So that's really the message here. For those of you board members that are watching the recording, thanks for paying. Thanks for your interest and engagement. And please, you know, talk to us about coming along and meeting with your board, either virtually or face to face, whatever we can make happen. We really would love to. Sean, do you think your board are probably quite experienced with this by now, because you're coming up to your 3rd cycle of accreditation, aren't you?
Yeah, very different board though. So none of the existing board have been through it before, so it'll be new for them. Yeah.
Yes, and well, I think we're going to leave it there, because I was trying to sort of stick with that hour-ish. And so thanks very much for being part of this, for contributing to all of our learning around this. Really great. What you know is that Lisa will send you a link to the record. She'll let you know when the recording is up in the website member portal. That you know where it is, and I'll put all the resources up there as well. So thanks very much for being part of it. Oh, I wanted to tell you the next session, if you're interested in this, is on the 17th of February, but it's all about child safety standards, child safe environments, because there's a ton of that peppered through the requirements for service excellence, right? You'll see where it connects, but it connects in other ways as well. So it's very important. And we've got some tools and resources for you, because we recently developed a kit aligned to the child safe standards. So we're going to share that with you as well. Child safety, next topic. Everybody wave, because it looks so good.
Thank you, Marie. That was a really good session.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.